Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Just looking at some pull requests here at the end of the day. Been doing a lot of Vue today, a lot of JavaScript actually, the past few days. Had some pretty cool new stuff coming to Laravel this week, actually, with the new errors directive from Caleb Porzio, where basically in a Blade template you can say @errors and then the attribute name, and then if there is an error for that attribute, kind of goes into this block and you can just echo out message. Which is pretty cool. That's already in the documentation, both in the Blade documentation and under validation as well. And then there was also a feature that went into Laravel 5.9 actually, where we have the route redirect method, of course, already in Laravel 5.8. But in 5.9, you can redirect and use parameters from the original URL in your redirect URL. So you can say like, redirect / people / ID redirects to /user / ID. So that was another pretty cool feature that went into the framework this week. And then I actually looked at a package from Jonathan Rennick called Advanced, what's it called? Jonathan Rennick, Advanced Eloquent. Yeah, Rennick / Advanced Eloquent. That has some, it's actually only like 15 lines of code in the whole package, but it gives you some pretty advanced like subselect stuff that probably I'm going to bake into Laravel. So I found myself reaching for it where I had a, say like a project that has many deployments like Forge, and I want to get the project and the latest deployment timestamp. And the deployments table has the project ID. So, I mean, at first I reached for, I was just going to eager load like the latest deployment, but Eloquent eager loading doesn't support limit clauses. So I actually looked at this package, and you can basically get it in one query using a subselect in your select clause. So it makes it pretty sweet and pretty slick, because you can just use Eloquent the whole time. So that was a really nice package. I think probably something that should just be in the core, because it's a pretty cool little helper that actually I think would be pretty commonly used by people. Let's see some of these questions. The secret project does not involve more front end than back end, I would say. It's not really a front end focused project. The secret project has a front end itself, but it's nothing to do with really front end development. Laravel Forge, I was actually just talking about that with Mohammed and Dries this week. One of the big features I'd like to see in Forge this year is some sort of database backup stuff. So that's a pretty sizable feature probably. That's really the only kind of main feature we have on the horizon with Forge. Lately just been doing, bug fixing and support, customer support on stuff like that. The future of Lumen is something I get asked fairly frequently, actually, where I feel like micro frameworks are sort of this catch-22 where if you add a bunch of stuff to them, then people complain because they're too bloated. And if you don't add anything, you sort of get asked, is the project dead or what's the future? So building micro frameworks is kind of a losing battle, I feel like. I don't know if other micro framework maintainers like the Slim or whatever else maintainers get that same thing, but it's kind of hard because, I don't know, the purpose of a micro framework is to be small. The next LTS version of Laravel this is actually in the documentation under release notes. Let's see. So actually the next release, I guess, would be an LTS. So August 2019. So that will either be 5.9 or I think I said on a snippet I did that if we go to semantic versioning for the framework, then of course that would mean it would be 6.0. And if we did go to semantic versioning, that means you would really have a new major version every 6 months. It wouldn't really change anything in terms of upgrade process or time, but it would mean like 6.0 this summer, 7.0 this winter or next winter, 8.0 next summer. So it'd be kind of like React, where eventually you just are up to like Laravel 16 or whatever. But we'll see. Casting to custom classes has come up several times, and I actually wrote a PR for it at one point, but there was still some debate about it, and I'm not sure if all the debate was totally valid. A lot of the times we talk about this, I feel like there's only a few use cases that come up. It's like either money or addresses, and it's just not something that seems to have a ton of use cases, but I think it could be useful. I would like to figure out how to do it. In my PR, which was different than some of the other PRs, it was like if you say you had an address custom mutation and you did like user arrow address arrow line 1 and updated that, it would persist back into the user when you saved. So it worked two ways. A lot of the PRs that have been submitted are only one way, like they're only reading, and they don't really handle anything with updates. Anyway, kind of a every time it comes up, I feel like there's debate around it. So that's why it's always so kind of contested that I don't usually pull the trigger on it. Multi-tenant SaaS apps, built a few of them so far. I guess I built 3 of them. Forge, Envoyer, and Snappy was a multi-tenant SaaS. When I worked at Forge and Envoyer, they don't have multiple databases per user. So it's just a user ID column, where you need it, or like a team ID sometimes if you're doing Spark with teams. And then you just filter the queries using the user ID. So that's actually the easiest way to do it, and the less complicated, just because it just sort of works out of the box with Laravel. So that's the only way I've ever done it. Now when I first worked at Userscape and we started building Snappy, I remember Ian suggested or kind of wanted to explore using a database per customer. And that just got to be kind of gnarly and not worth it was really a premature optimization at the time, or maybe for security as well. And ended up just not being worth it. We just ditched it and went back to just your traditional kind of user ID foreign key on different tables. But people ask me this multi-tenant question a ton. I don't know. I didn't know that. For one, I don't know exactly what they mean. I don't know if they're confused about the single database thing, or they only are asking me about the multi-database thing. If it's multi-database, I'm kind of surprised so many people are trying to do multiple databases or a single, a database per user, because I thought that was pretty rare, but gets asked a lot. Does it make sense to create an eloquent model against a view? You may have to rephrase that question for me. I'm not quite sure what you mean there. There's not really anything planned for Lumen other than bug fixes. No like big features, obviously, because that would sort of like defeat the purpose of it being small. So, it'd probably stay how it is, I think, for the foreseeable future. Kind of geared for writing just simple APIs. Laravel Hackathon, a week in which Laravel's top 10 contributors get together to talk about the future of the framework. Who even are the top 10 contributors? That'd be a good thing to know. Almost have 2,000 contributors. Let's see. Top 10 contributors. Me, Graham Campbell. Graham Campbell really racked up a lot of commits on kind of code quality, especially before he sort of automated himself with style CI. Lucas, who works at Shopify, Mohammed, Till, Kruss, Joseph Silber, and Tatiana, who does our changelog, Vlakov, Dries, and other Mohammed, Crinobone, has contributed pretty regularly, actually, since a very long time ago. But no, that overall idea of, top 10 contributors talking about the future of the framework sounds pretty interesting. It'd also probably be good to get like different businesses involved in that discussion. But yeah, pretty cool idea. I have to give that some thought. I've never used TypeScript, so I don't really have any opinions on Vue.js moving to TypeScript. I like Vue.js, but never used TypeScript at all. I definitely know people are deploying Laravel with Kubernetes. I don't know the specifics of how that's done, but I've talked to people who are doing it, mainly like talking to them at Laracon. They'll mention to me like they're using that type of setup. Yeah, semantic versioning would change the Tuesday release cycle. It would actually make it a little bit more kind of standardized, where you would just have I guess you would have to decide, whether to do a minor or a patch release. I don't know. So what's pure semantic versioning? What do they specify? Qualifies as a minor release. If new backwards compatible functionality is introduced. That's kind of every week would be a minor release. Yeah, so every week would probably be a minor release if we were doing semantic versioning, because we add stuff, feels like every week. Do you think Laravel currently fits the model of microservices well enough? I guess it depends how big your microservice is. Probably most people would consider Laravel pretty big for like a microservice. I think Lumen is more geared for that. Laravel's kind of full stack, so I think most people would consider it kind of heavy for that. But again, it depends on your traffic. It may not even matter. Most apps probably don't get enough traffic for that to even be an issue in terms of framework overhead, at least. Recommendations for courses or books for improving code quality. The best TDD course out there, I think, is Adams. I don't get paid for saying that, but in terms of Laravel, that's probably the best TDD course out there. Maybe one of the better courses just for TDD in general, simply because I think the way he approaches testing is like super productive, since he doesn't get all bogged down in a bunch of mocks and like super low level testing, which on a lot of apps doesn't make sense. So like on the app I'm building right now, like Secret Project 6 or whatever, I'm going to my test directory. In the unit folder, I actually have 0 tests in the unit folder. That's funny. How many test classes do I have, I wonder? Gosh, it's got to be like 100. Yeah, it looks like maybe over 100 test classes in the feature test folder, though. But yeah, that's probably one of the better courses. Overall code quality, I think, is just a matter of practice and trial and error. Every time you build something, you kind of learn stuff and learn what worked and what didn't work. Even I changed little stuff, from Forge to Envoyer to Horizon to Nova to now. Especially from Envoyer to Spark or like Horizon or Nova, there's pretty decent change in terms of how I coded those things. The controllers get smaller, I think. The further you go, like into my development career, controllers get smaller, models get fatter. I feel like lately. Anyway, yeah. Especially once I sort of adopted more of an outside-in test approach, that felt a lot more natural. I have a lot of controllers. I've heard of October CMS, but I've never used it. I've never used any CMS actually in my entire 10-year career. Besides WordPress, I guess. How do I handle deletion of records in a database that has, say it has users and orders, but the orders should stay? I don't know. I guess I would just leave them there, but then the user ID would be messed up or it wouldn't connect to anything, which I guess is okay. I don't know. I guess it would just return null. Have I considered a Hackintosh? No, not in a very long time. Back a long time ago, I think I thought about it, but I have the 5K iMac. I kind of like it right now. Hoping they come out with the 6K iMac that was rumored with a bigger display. That would be cool. But part of me does want kind of like one true machine. So like a beefy MacBook Pro with the LG 5K is always a little tempting too, because just sort of one machine to carry around everywhere. Design patterns question exceeds the 200 character limit. Got to make sure you're using a single responsibility principle, I guess. This is the Anjunadeep 10 album. Laravel API documentation is something I haven't done. Not familiar with your options there. I generate the API docs for Laravel using Sammy, which is now deprecated, unfortunately, because I thought it was one of the nicer ones. It still works on the latest Laravel, but I feel like it's sort of clock is ticking on that, breaking. I don't know what, sort of the de facto standard is going to be after this. I saw some PHP project recently just remove their API docs entirely because Sammy was deprecated. A Laravel package that registers migrations and classes and can theoretically be ran as a microservice. Plan on using strategy pattern to communicate either in project or remotely. You have to send me a gist of that, of what you mean. A little hard to take in just on the text. If if I'm using the repository pattern in my controllers, do you agree they should not return instances of eloquent models? Yeah, if you're doing like a pure repository pattern, and you have it behind an interface and you're going to have multiple implementations of the repository, then yeah, you probably shouldn't be returning eloquent models. However, a lot of people use repositories as just sort of a way to group eloquent queries that they reuse throughout their project. And the repository maybe not even interface because there's only one implementation of it. If that's the case, then yeah, it should be fine to return eloquent models because that's the only implementation is the eloquent repository, and you're only using it as a way to sort of organize your eloquent operations. In that case, I think it's fine to return eloquent models. Can you play 30 seconds of a drum lick? Maybe in a little bit I'll get the pad out. I'm kind of rusty. Hints or sneaks on the secret project. That's what me and Adam have been pairing on past couple weeks, working on the UI, because he's been sort of helping with the Tailwind section, and I've been writing the Vue.js section mainly. And we've actually got enough of it built now where I've got enough stuff I can kind of copy and paste from. So I actually built a whole screen myself today. Pretty sizable project though. Like I said, not front-end related, more back-end related. I don't know. I built the whole thing actually as a CLI client first. Built out the whole like Passport API and a CLI client to like spike out the whole project, and actually built the entire project that way. Even logging in with two-factor authentication and stuff. So it is sort of like a hosted service. It's not like a package you would download. So I had to pull in some Spark stuff. I didn't use Spark exactly. I copied and pasted like some of the backend for Spark, which kind of brings me to the kind of another roadmap thing for Spark that Mohammed wants to do is sort of a headless Spark where it's a kind of a JSON API and you can bring your own front end for all the subscription stuff. Laravel certification test. I would definitely read the docs from top to bottom, beginning to end, because I think every question, Sean talked to me about this, that every question is answerable from the docs, actually. You don't need any outside resources. But, I mean, regardless if you're taking the certification or not, reading the docs from beginning to end is actually pretty helpful. There's a lot of like kind of nuggets buried in there that you might not otherwise be aware of. I put interfaces in a top-level contracts directory. Yeah, that's usually what I do. Have a contracts directory right under app with all my interfaces in there. And then for stuff that talks to like third-party services, like if I have something that talks to DigitalOcean or whatever, then I'll make like a app/services directory and make like a DigitalOcean class. It's sort of my own little like SDK or whatever else I'm communicating with. Just a second. Why Vue? I don't know. It's just kind of easier, I think. And I'm super used to it now. But at first it was because it was easier to learn. Did I have a career puberty period where you believed you knew all the right patterns? Yes, actually. And that's why I find it really funny when people sort of yell at me about like certain patterns as if like I'm not aware of them or something, because like I did kind of have that phase. It was actually more when I was doing .NET where I had that phase where everything was just like super abstracted. It's like really architecture astronaut type code, like really into Uncle Bob books and pragmatic programmer books and stuff like that. Not that those are bad really, but yeah, I kind of went through that phase. And then of course I wrote the ebook or an ebook on, my first ebook was about Solid essentially in Laravel. So yeah, I mean, a lot of those principles are still really good. Like a lot of programming principles are really valid, but people kind of like wield them like a hammer and get, I think, like wrong ideas in their head about how to even apply them. I guess they try to apply them in this like silver bullet fashion where if I check these check boxes, then my code's going to be so like easy to maintain. And, you know, like if you work anywhere where you work with someone like that, like, you know, the code becomes really pretty complicated pretty fast. So I don't know. I just kind of try to take a more intuitive approach these days where it's sort of obvious, you know, if code is good or bad. It's not like it's some like, I don't know. It's not like that complicated to know, but especially if it's easy to test. If it's easy to test without jumping through a lot of hoops, then it's probably not that bad. And if it's easy to follow, it's easy to read. Easy to test, easy to read. Is there value in using resources if all I'm returning is everything that's in the model and no transformation is being done? I've kind of been having that debate myself like recently because I didn't use resources at first and now I'm scared like eventually I'm going to have to switch to it and I'll have to like recode everything to resources. I don't know. That part kind of scares me, even though it's kind of a violation of the you ain't going to need it principle. I don't know. If I was doing it again, maybe I would just make resources from the start, just so that I had them. If you're going to cast eloquent instances to domain objects entities, you really want like some kind of, in .NET, there was this thing called AutoMapper. I feel like someone tried to write something like that for PHP. And when I first came to PHP, it was actually one of the things from .NET that I sort of missed the most because I used it a lot back in my more architecture astronaut type days. But yeah, you need some sort of mapper layer that maps one object to another object. And AutoMapper tried to do that in this sort of conventional way where any properties that matched automatically got mapped and then you could override stuff. Table Plus is pretty nice. I'm actually liking it quite a bit. Yeah, overall pretty happy with it. 5 out of 5. I've never used GraphQL. Seems pretty neat though. Seems like some overhead to set up in PHP. I've seen some packages that are trying to make that easier, but I don't know. I think I've heard of Twill, but I've never used Twill, but I have heard of Twill. I just don't use a lot of CMSs just because I don't do projects that really require a CMS. More features into Nova. Yes. I was actually talking to David about this, but probably about to hire someone else to mainly focus on Envoy or Nova and give David a hand there and start fleshing out some more stuff we want to do. I actually would like to decide that like this week. I would like to write another ebook, actually. I kind of want to write like Apprentice to Artisan 2, but every time I sit down to try to sketch out like a table of contents, I just can't like flesh it out that much. I don't know if it's because like I'm just too close to the subject matter and can't see like what people would be interested in, but it's just hard for me to make it like come up with, you know, a handful of chapters that I think would be interesting. So I think one thing a lot of people want to know is just sort of like how I write Laravel applications myself. But I don't know, like it's hard for me to put a lot of meat there because my Laravel apps don't do anything too crazy. I don't know. If you have any chapter ideas, give them to me because I would like to do that at some point. That could be pretty cool. I think what the whole focus of the book would be, I think, is I want to demonstrate how I approach writing a Laravel app. Underrated features in Laravel. Gosh, a lot of stuff in Laravel I take for granted now, like for stuff that's not necessarily in other PHP frameworks, like route model binding. I take that for granted because I use it like every day, and it's really nice. I really like Echo and event broadcasting. I don't know if that's underrated though, but it's just something I like. What else? All the Q stuff is pretty powerful in terms of the rest of the PHP ecosystem, I think. But again, I'm not sure if I would say that's underrated. Those are just some of my favorite features. I never take naps. I just always feel worse after naps. So rarely take a nap. Even when I try, I feel like I'm never successful in even falling asleep. I've always wondered if you saw a gap in the PHP frameworks based on what you were doing in .NET and used .NET as a template for Laravel. When Laravel first came out, some of the features like the dependency injection container and Blade were definitely influenced by .NET. Some of the other features were more Rails influenced, like Eloquent. I'm not even sure if Eloquent was even in like the first betas of Laravel because there was another active record package, but the ORM was more inspired by Rails. A lot of the controller stuff was more inspired by Rails. And then I also looked at Sinatra for inspiration as well, because Laravel 1.0 was a lot smaller, almost more like a micro framework, really. But the dependency injection container and the templating were very .NET inspired. As far as I know, I wrote the first reflection IOC container in PHP back in 2010, and it was actually released on Google Code because I didn't have a GitHub account. So it was on Google Code, and I don't think anyone really used it. But I released a little package for CodeIgniter that integrated it into CodeIgniter. Adding methods to a job class. I don't know, I add little helper methods to them all the time, like protected methods. I'm not sure if that's what the question is, though. Client-side validation, I never do, other than just like, the required attributes on inputs or whatever, the email attributes. I never try to do any advanced validation on the client side, really. I just let it hit the server. Avoid burnout. How do I avoid burnout? I think one way I've avoided burnout is I'm just always working on my own projects, so I don't feel like it's very fair in a way. Like when I'm working on other people's stuff, like at a conventional job, I feel like I got burned out a lot faster. So anytime you're kind of being told what to do, I think it's easier to get burned out. But for me, I'm just working on stuff I'm sort of always interested in. So I haven't ever really felt burned out on Laravel, actually, in the past 8 years. Acknowledge, I know. Acknowledged. This is not a replacement of Laravel snippet. I don't know if I'm going to do a snippet today. I might do a snippet today. It's getting kind of late in the day here, but no, this isn't going to be like a weekly thing. I just wanted to do it this week and try it out. And sort of this week, it does probably replace the snippet, but not every week. How do I handle people saying PHP Laravel is not very performant? A lot of times people are measuring that in these weird ways. Like they'll run a test on their laptop for Laravel and say, I only got 500 requests a second instead of like 1,000. But I mean, 500 requests a second is like, what, 43 million hits a day? I don't know. That's a lot of hits. And that's just on like one server. So if you're doing 500 requests a second in traffic, then I don't know, you're doing a lot of traffic. And you probably have a lot of money. Hopefully. I don't know. PHP is getting faster. Laravel's, one of our goals for 2019 is to make Laravel faster, actually. Dries is going to be looking into that this year. Part of that's, I don't know, it's hard to say, where to optimize that, because the framework is actually pretty fast. And when you start throwing in like DB queries or external services, that's where it's actually going to get slow, in my experience. Rarely is the framework really the bottleneck. The 7.4 preload, that's going to be a really cool thing. So in PHP 7.4, you can specify a preload file that sort of preloads a bunch of classes into memory. And then they don't have to load on every request. That's actually going to be a pretty big speed up for Laravel, I have a feeling. Like some of these big frameworks are probably going to see like a 50% speed boost, I bet. Just because that's a lot, seriously, a lot of Laravel's overhead is just just loading classes. Yeah, that's good. I haven't actually benchmarked it yet though. If someone could please benchmark that or like build a file to do that and test it, that would be really nice actually. I would probably give away like a Forge subscription or something, like a year for that. I mentioned that I use models as a rich API for my app. What strategy do I use to defer to a service or some other code? I've done it a few ways. A lot of times, sometimes I do just use like the app helper to fire off a call to some other service. Sometimes I'll inject the other service. I feel like a lot of times I'll just use the app helper though, if it's still easily tested. It's all about the tests. I haven't followed .NET Core at all. I haven't really followed the .NET scene in a few years. To follow up to Paul's question about the rich API layer, I think it's just the apps I'm writing, but a lot of times I'm firing off a queued job from those methods, more so than actually calling it kind of a synchronous service. So yeah, I feel like I'm doing that a lot in my model methods, firing off jobs. How do I get myself to avoid making stuff that will violate the you ain't gonna need it principle? Sometimes it's just sort of experience from building like Forge, Envoy, or Spark, Nova, Telescope. I sort of am familiar with what I am and am not going to need. So that's made it a little easier. I don't know. That's a tough one. It's just hard to know sometimes, really hard to know, hard to predict. I will say that like a lot of people get focused in on making their code as absolutely best as possible so that, their app will be great and marvelous. But I found a lot of times it's not really like that ends up being the issue. It's the business requirements change that ends up giving you a lot of code changes. That's really the hard part to predict. I'm going to be revealing the secret project at Laracon, unless something goes really wrong at this point. But I feel like I'm far enough along now where if I don't reveal it at Laracon, then something has gone really bad. And I would probably just be honest about what happened, because really far along. I don't know. That would be a nightmare, actually, at this point, being this close to Laracon, if that happened. Is there anything I would do different in Laravel of coding it today? Well, I would probably just start with what I have in Laravel 5.8. It took some iterations to get to this point, especially with service providers and how all that stuff works. That ended up being a pretty good system. Probably should have, well, it's hard to say. You could say I should have adopted Composer earlier. We still adopted it pretty early in Laravel 3 or 4. But at the time, Composer wasn't. It was still very new, actually, when Laravel 2 or 3 was out. I don't know my Myers-Briggs personality type. I have to take a test. Docker version of Homestead. So a couple of Docker options that I've seen. One is Chris Fidal's Vessel, which is sort of pretty minimal, just PHP, MySQL, and Redis. I've used that a few times and kind of like it. There's also Laradoc, which has more sort of options and more database systems and stuff. Yeah. E-commerce clients lucky to get 100 users online in a 15-minute window, let alone 500 requests per second. Yeah, 500 requests per second, like on framework benchmarks, that comes up slow, but that's just so many requests, actually. The Laravel.com website gets like 6 million hits per month. And that's like almost $5,000 a month in ad revenue. So I don't know. If you're capitalizing on 43 million hits a month in any way, then you're making a significant amount of money, probably. Largest solutions of Laravel. Gosh, I know I've heard of some big ones. A lot of what's crazy is like you would think I know more of this, but a lot of times I hear about the biggest Laravel installations at Laracon, and people will come up to me and say, hey, we have a 20 bazillion line Laravel application. And then I never sort of hear from them or see them again. And they're just in types that are not like very public, or like they're not tweeting about it all the time. So that's what's crazy is like, there's so much stuff that happens sort of behind the scenes that they're just not people that are on Twitter. They're not people that are like very vocal about what they're doing, and they have like very significant applications. Lots of big companies use it for various things. I don't know, Discovery, Fox, Starbucks, the government. Ran the Fallout 4 and Elder Scrolls Online splash page. That was pretty cool. The Tomorrowland Music Festival used it. That was actually a really high traffic situation too. How do I cope with remote work? Does it get me down that I work from home all the time? Sometimes, actually, yeah. It's kind of weird to work from home all the time. I think working in an office with your team members is actually more productive in terms of getting stuff done. However, it's just so hard to like co-locate people in the same town that way. So like ideally your perfect team would all just happen to live in the same geographical area and all be able to conveniently work together. But I think that's so rare that's why remote work is popular. And I don't think remote work is bad. Like it's great, and it's great for a lot of people, but yeah, it is tough. Sometimes I try to get out and work other places, but there's not a lot of, the best co-working place to me is about 30 minutes away from me, which is not too bad. I don't go there a ton though. If we make a Laravel live Portugal conference in Europe, would you come? Ooh, depends. Depends on when it is. I would like to visit Portugal. Looks like a really nice place. But yeah, it depends. Ultimate question, models folder. I don't really use a models folder. I don't have anything against the models folder though. It's not something that I find like repulsive. It's just not something I really use. Notice me or I'll keep spanning. TJ the big dog. Woo. Who do I look up to and admire in development? Several JavaScript developers I think are pretty good. I think the Zeit team that does like Zeit now, those people are really smart. I don't know, several other JavaScript people are smart. Evan Yu's pretty smart. I still think DHH is pretty good programmer. I don't know though. Some of the stuff that's gone into Rails recently, I'm not totally sold on. I'm not sure I would make the same decisions there. But what else? Who else is good programmer? There's lots of good programmers out there. Actually, there's lots of good people in the Laravel world that actually I feel like are like smarter than me a lot of times. Any thoughts on event sourcing? I've never used event sourcing in a real app. Seems kind of neat. If your application fits it. Seems like all the docs I read on it are always like banking apps though. I'd be interested to see someone do like a event sourcing course for something that was not anything financial in the financial sector, but maybe that's just where event sourcing shines. Maybe that's not realistic. So I think Dries is actually going to speak on event sourcing at Laracon US. I've never been noticed in public here. Well, I've never been noticed in public here by a stranger. Here in Arkansas. Yeah, never been noticed in public. Sometimes when I go places like Disney World or something like that, I kind of keep an eye out for people in like Laravel shirts or gear, but I've never run into anyone yet. Laravel Forge needs more one-click installs like October CMS. Yeah, I have to look into how that's installed. If it's installed via Git, then one-click install doesn't make a lot of sense. But if it's something that's installed kind of like WordPress, then yeah, that could be a possibility. Do I like Python syntax or prefer C-style syntax like PHP follows? I don't know. I guess I kind of like the Ruby Python style syntax a little better, I guess, but I don't hate PHP syntax. It's not bad. I like JavaScript syntax too. Is the secret project inspired by Zeit at all? Yeah, they had a little inspiration in there, I feel like. Pretty smart guys. I don't know. I just think they do. I just think they're inspiring from like a developer friendliness sort of way. Like they have a really good sense of developer experience. What is the question I get most asked when people talk to me? Probably, did I ever expect that Laravel would get this big? I get asked that a lot in person. And the answer is really no. I didn't expect it to get this big at all. Would I say that Laravel is mature now, meaning the framework is full featured? I think so. I think it's pretty mature now for the past year or two, actually, past couple of years. I think lately I've just been fleshing out the ecosystem, like, Nova, kind of fleshed out the admin panel, fleshing out some of the Q stuff with Horizon, debugging stuff with Telescope. But as far as like the core kernel of the framework, I feel like, yeah, it's pretty mature. When I've been building this new project I'm working on, there was actually very few things that I wanted in the core. Probably that advanced eloquent stuff by Jonathan Rennick I wanted in the core. That's pretty simple stuff. That's not anything big. What else kind of jumped out at me? Oh, the job-based failure delays I added to the core for the new project. But yeah, other than that, there wasn't a lot that I needed. When's Laravel JS coming out? I think that's essentially Vue.js. It's Laravel JS. I'm not sure I would ever come up. I don't even have the skills to build anything like that. Any big updates on the horizon for Nova? Yeah, earlier I mentioned that we're actually looking to hire someone, and probably they would start with focusing on Envoyer and Nova, I would say. And Mohammed would focus on Forge and Spark. Do I ever experience deployment fear or cold feet? Yeah, I have definitely experienced that in the past when I've deployed some big stuff on Forge or something like that. My typical work day is pretty much 8 to 5. Really, even though I work from home, it's a pretty standard work day. Would I like to see more Laravel features split out to separate packages? So we've actually been doing that a little bit. So we split out the Slack and Nextmode notifications. I want to also split out the Spark Post mail driver and probably the Rackspace storage driver I would like to split out. Other than that, though, no, not really, but I would definitely like to split those out. Like sometimes when I get asked this, I come into my service provider's file and I say, like, what would I want to be optional here? So like OS service provider, no, I don't want to split out. Broadcasting I could definitely see if someone could make the argument that Laravel / broadcasting should be like a package, even although I use it like on every app I write, but I could see how people could make that argument for sure. Bus service provider can't be removed. That's really heavily tied into sort of the job and container. Cache, I probably wouldn't remove. Cookies I wouldn't remove. Database I wouldn't remove. Encryption I wouldn't remove. I don't think I would remove encryption. Oh no, we encrypt our cookies, so we couldn't remove that. File system service provider. I don't know. We use that a lot internally. Hashing, probably. If we're going to have auth, have to have hashing. Mail, could maybe make the argument that mail could be an optional package. Notifications as well. Pagination, probably don't want to remove. Pipeline, don't want to remove because you can't remove really as a middleware. Queues, potentially optional. Redis, potentially optional. Password reset, sort of tied in with auth. If auth is baked in, then that probably stays. Sessions probably stays. Translation stays because of validation. View stays. So I don't know. What was that? Maybe broadcast, maybe mail notifications and Redis, maybe queues. I don't know. Maybe 5 things at least put out there, but it doesn't increase the speed any. To split those out, it doesn't do anything for performance. So it doesn't matter. If we split those out, a lot of those are deferred service providers anyway. Like queue service provider. Let's see. Queue service providers is deferred. Redis service provider is deferred. Yeah, so let's see. Notification service provider. It's not deferred because it loads views. Mail service provider is deferred. So yeah, you're not going to see any big increase there, really. How much do I pay monthly for my infrastructure services? I can actually tell you that. I made a spreadsheet, actually, keeps track of all that. So all of my services, monthly expenses, I pay $1,700 a month. Most of that is DigitalOcean with $566 a month on DigitalOcean. Actually, $200 a month on Pusher. $200 a month on web fonts. Business insurance, GitHub. Yeah, but about $1,700 a month, which is actually really good considering compared to revenue of things like Forge and Envoy, that's really low expenses. Of course, most of the expenses are employees and staff. Thoughts on React.js? I think it's really cool, but I've just never used it. The concept of React.js is cool. Fastest response time in Laravel apps. So I was actually running a Laravel app and testing how many milliseconds were spent in Laravel recently. And the whole Laravel request took 5 milliseconds. So that's what I mean about, yeah, are there PHP frameworks that respond in 1 millisecond? Yes, but cutting 4 milliseconds off your total response time, I don't know, it's hard to say. It would be hard to even do that in Laravel to cut 80% of the response. But what I'm saying is that's so low compared to a couple queries that it's hard to say. A lot of those PHP framework benchmarks are sort of, I don't know. I don't know how valuable that is for the real world. Do I feel like throwing my phone or Mac out the window when I read that the tweet or post that Laravel is not enterprise? No. I don't know, It's fine, It's what the programmer makes of it, really. As with really any framework. You can write really bad code in Laravel. You can write really good code in Laravel. You can write really bad code in Symfony. You can write really good code in Symfony. I don't know. The framework is not the problem ever. I don't feel like, unless your framework is just really bad. But if you have a framework that lets you have a controller that you can inject stuff into, then it's up to you from there. How was my last vacation, work from vacation situation? So when I go on vacation, I usually bring my laptop and just answer emails for 30 minutes in the morning. And then maybe 30 minutes at night, and then that's it. I try to stay on top of GitHub. I just try to maintain it, while I'm gone. I can't really like get ahead of it while I'm gone, but if I can keep it from ballooning up, that's good. I love the idea Spark, but it's credit card only limited. Yeah. I don't know. That's just what's common here in the US. So that's kind of how I wrote it at first. I know Molly in the Netherlands are exploring sort of a Molly version of Cashier. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I think you should consider doing an e-commerce package. That's sort of the same problem as the CMS thing, where I've never used an e-commerce package and wouldn't even know like what people want. I do think an e-commerce Laravel thing is definitely hotly requested. I get that request a lot, but I don't know if I'm the right person to do that. I think it would take someone with a lot of Laravel experience and a lot of e-commerce experience. Is Laravel 4.2 not already end of life? Let's see. The old release notes. 4.2 is not even on the. I'm pretty sure 4.2 is kind of already end of life. Enable or disable debug button in Laravel Forge. That'd be kind of cool. That wouldn't be that hard to build. Pretty cool little idea. Sean says he'll be rolling out an e-commerce package for Laravel as part of ThetaLabs.io later this year. What do I think of JIT in PHP 8? So, yeah, I guess kudos for them to build it for building that. Sounds pretty complicated. By their own admission, who knows how much that will help on web applications. So on the blog post that Joe put out about JIT on PHP 8, he said that it's good for more intensive things like graphic rendering or 3D modeling, but I'm just not sure people that are doing those kind of things are going to reach for PHP as their language of choice, So I don't know. I don't know how that's going to pan out. The only fear I have is it's going to make just like maintenance on the core of PHP harder unless there's going to be less PHP features, but hopefully that doesn't play out that way. Because it doesn't sound like it's going to really benefit web applications at this point, at least. Thoughts on managed databases. I love managed anything, really. More managed, the better. The P on my hat is not related to the secret project. A GUI for removing some of the Laravel boilerplate creation. No, I haven't really thought about that myself. But an easier way to share starter kits is something I have thought about, where when you do Laravel new, if you could pass it like a flag for like even a GitHub repo, like a user/repo, and then if there was some convention that it would use a different skeleton setup from that repository instead of the standard setup. But I haven't actually ever done that. Do I eat turnips? Have I ever eaten a turnip before? Good question. I don't know if I've eaten a turnip before. Probably. Probably in something else. I don't usually just snack on turnips though. My typical breakfast. Usually cereal. Lately I've been having Crunch Berry cereal. I really like waffles. I like eggs. Do I hit the gym? Yeah, sometimes. I have a gym pretty close to here. Go lift some weights. Should probably go today, really. I don't really like working out though. Like some people they're like, oh, working out is my life. I don't know. Especially there's been times where I've worked out consistently for like over a year and I hated it the whole time. Thoughts on how the Virginia versus Auburn game ended? Pretty good. Went to overtime, pretty good game. I didn't have any skin in the game really, so Didn't matter to me who won. I thought that out of bounds interference play was pretty crazy. That had to suck. Tabs or spaces? I use spaces because that's what PSR2 uses. Hi, I'm from Bigelow. We need a PHP group in Arkansas. Yeah, that would be cool. We've had a few Laravel meetups in Little Rock before. Jeffrey Way actually came to one of those meetups. There was probably like 15 people there, I would say, but that was a couple of years ago. What do you say to people who bash on PHP? I don't know. Who cares? It's not cool to bash on a programming language, you know, like it's not like that makes you like a tough guy, you know. So whatever. I don't know. I kind of like PHP, especially lately. Like I'm pretty happy with PHP's features. Anything, you know, like 5.3 was obviously the biggest lately with namespaces, closures, all that. But then the speed improvements when 7.0 was really good. I don't know. I'm happy with PHP, really. I'm glad that looks like short closures, at least single line short closures are finally going to make it into PHP. Hopefully that gets extended to like multi-line closures. Yeah, that would be cool. But other than that, I don't have a lot of problems with PHP. How many people are currently employed with Laravel, including me? So current official Laravel staff is me, Mohammed, Saeed, and Dries. So 3 people. David Hemphill is my partner, my business partner on Laravel Nova. But he is not a Laravel employee in any way. We just sort of co-founded the Nova product. And hopefully I'm thinking about adding another staff member, which I've said, but that person would focus on Envoyer and Nova. If you go Simver, how would you do LTS versions? I think it would be the same, just every 2 years. I don't think anything would change there. I get really frustrated every time you need to do server stuff. How do I achieve the same dev experience for DevOps stuff? I don't know. Depends on what kind of DevOps stuff you're doing. You know, Forge is kind of simple DevOps. If you're doing pretty complex DevOps, I don't know. We shall see. May look into that. What is my rank in Rocket League? The highest I've ever been ranked in doubles is Plat 3.4. I don't know. Right now, I think I'm like Plat 2.4. I was on a losing streak lately. Not very good. I don't have any tips on convincing Java or .NET developers to give Laravel a try. I don't know. I think it's easiest if you can kind of build something with somebody, you know, like if you're pair programming with them on Laravel and they can kind of see firsthand if they like it or don't like it. I do remember the IRC days with Laravel. And yeah, those early Laracon EUs, those were fun times. That was one of the nicest conference venues I think we've had is the early Laracon EUs in the BIM House conference venue. That was a nice venue. Can you give an example of when not to use Eloquent? There have been times when I've not used Eloquent for very, very large queries, where you maybe need to pull back like thousands of records. The slow part of Eloquent is not really the query, though. It's more like the hydrating the models. That's the slow part. So the more models you pull back, the slower that's going to be. But of course, you'd have to pull back, you know, a lot for it to be a big deal. But I got this painting off Etsy, I think. This Captain Kirk and Spock painting. Did I ever feel overwhelmed at the start when building Laravel? Yeah, I think so. I remember throwing it out entirely a few times and starting from scratch just because I couldn't Just couldn't crack certain things. So I must have been overwhelmed. What's my favorite database? I don't know. I mainly use MySQL just because that's what I'm used to. But, I don't use MySQL because I made some thorough comparison with other databases and thought MySQL was better. It's just like what I'm used to. I haven't watched all of Star Trek Discovery. I've only seen like most of season 1. And I was kind of letting season 2 finish before I dove into it. But I liked it so far. Like I liked what I saw of season 1. I think I've got about 7 or 8 episodes into it. A high-level explanation of how I got started building Eloquent. So the crazy thing about building something like Eloquent is that the first like 80 to even 90% is really easy. And it's basically just like dynamic getters and setters, a save method, an update method, a delete method. And even adding relationships is not that hard. I feel like it starts getting pretty gnarly when you start talking about eager loading, polymorphic relationships, scopes, all that final 10% of Eloquent is a lot harder than the first 90%. That's right. It's kind of deceiving in a way. Like you start building your own ORM and it feels like so easy and fast at first, but it will get really hard at the end if you care about those features. How do I handle days where I'm not motivated to work on something? How do I tackle those days? I probably just get less done. I don't know. I try to just press through them in a way, but I don't know. There's definitely days where I don't get as much done as other days, for sure. So I'm not sure I have a big solution there. Yeah, I'll probably check out Avengers Endgame. I watched Infinity War, so. Am I going to see the DS9 documentary in theaters? That sounds pretty cool. I wonder if it's in any theaters near me. May 13th, one night only. Huh. Let's enter my zip code. Is it going? Oh yeah, it is going to be. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for that suggestion. Yeah, I'll have to do that. Let's look at my calendar. May 13th, I don't have anything going on. Oh, you're really cool. Add that to my to-do list. I didn't buy tickets to Endgame yet. My Git branching strategy for stuff like Forge and Envoyer, pretty standard, just like master branch, develop branch. Sometimes we'll deploy like some other branch to staging just to test something out, but not a very complicated branching strategy, really. Is a secret project related to DevOps in a way? I guess so. I mean, a lot of my projects are related to DevOps. So, I mean, because that's just kind of the tools I like to build are for developers. So, yeah, I guess you could say that. What role was Laravel filling that wasn't out there previously? So, Laravel came out at a kind of unique time in PHP's history where PHP 5.3 was relatively new. There was not a full stack framework that was PHP 5.3 only micro frameworks. And Laravel was kind of one of the first frameworks to sort of capitalize on two things, the 5.3 release and the sort of decline of CodeIgniter at the time had opened up this window where I felt like a PHP framework really had a good opportunity to come in. So like Fuel PHP was one of the frameworks that tried to do that, that bogged down for whatever reason. And then Laravel was the other, basically. And, I just focused a lot on documentation, user experience. Documentation on Fuel at the time was probably not as good as Laravel. That could have contributed to why Laravel took off like that. But it was sort of an opportune moment in PHP history that I don't think has really been replicated since, because just like the language hasn't really changed in that way, hasn't created a moment like that. Any plans to support pivot model eloquent events? That was added in Laravel 5.8, actually. Should be in the release notes. Will we ever be able to attach a server we already have on DigitalOcean or AWS to Forge? The problem with that is we have no way to know how your server is configured. Like, we have no guarantees if anything is set up right, if anything's going to work right. That's why that's not possible, really. If even just like one thing is off, then the whole experience could be bad. Eloquent's definitely the most complex Laravel component, yeah. Probably by a good margin, I would say. I don't know what's more complex after that. Maybe queues. But even queues, I would say, are order of magnitude less complex than Eloquent. Routing is probably up there too. Going to release a Blu-ray. Yeah, I'll definitely buy that. I use Todoist for my to-do app. I use it a lot. I'm in it every day. Are there PlayStations at the PlayStation Theater? Yes, actually. There are PlayStations built into the wall with like 3 or 4 TVs in the lobby. And they said that we could bring a game to play. So very possible that we could have Rocket League there. Any plans on integrating Angular like Vue and React? Hard to say. I mean, React's only integrated in the sense that it has that stub file that you can throw out there. I don't know. I don't really know anything about modern Angular, but I think you can release your own, presets. I think I have one microservice on Lumen. Yeah, we have the one Forge microservice on Lumen that has to do with Let's Encrypt certificate renewals. That's the only Lumen app I have in production. Yeah, my kids are kind of interested in programming, but they can't really type like very fast yet. One's in 3rd grade and one's in 1st grade. So that makes it a little challenging, but they can do like little programming learning apps on their iPad, kind of like Swift playgrounds and stuff. Favorite server provider? DigitalOcean and Linode and Vultr, like all the first-party Forge providers, I think are all pretty equally. To me, they all feel the same. AWS is really nice if you're doing anything pretty robust, just because they have a whole lot of stuff in there. Yeah, I do watch RLCS sometimes. Pretty crazy. I don't know if you saw it, but me and Adam actually played against Squishy Muffins in a 2v1 match. We got totally roasted, although we hit a few goals in on him, as one does when you're playing 2v1, I guess. But yeah, he was dominating us. Squishy still follows me on Twitter, though, which is really warms my heart, really. Live streaming Laracon, possible. I don't know. It's a lot of work and a lot of stress, actually, for not much benefit, I would say. And plus, we usually have the Laracon videos up like within, a day or two anyway for people that buy early access to them. So I don't know. It's mainly the stress of like so many people buy the live stream ticket and they're like, it's not working for me, or I never got the email with the link in it, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know. That's just not the kind of stress you want, like while you're trying to run a conference. All right, I'll probably hang out for like 5 more minutes, I guess. I haven't tried MongoDB in a very long time. I don't know, it just hasn't come up. Have you ever considered visiting Bulgaria? No, I don't think so. Let's Google Bulgaria. Images. Oh, that looks kind of nice though. Yeah, seems pretty cool. I don't even think I've been very close to Bulgaria before. Let's see. No. I guess the closest I've been is maybe like Italy. That's still kind of far away. I've been to Russia. That's also kind of far away. Any way to make Horizon work with SQS? Not really. Horizon only works with Redis because Redis is the only queue driver we have 100% control over. All the other queue drivers are like other services or queue systems. With Redis, we built the queue from the ground up. So we have total control over how it all works, and it lets us build something like Horizon. So if you want something like that for SQS, your closest bet is going to be like Telescope, which still gives you like your pending and active jobs and all that. My mentors when I was an early developer were mainly like my coworkers when I was doing .NET. So, you know, they were kind of my mentors. How long do I spend designing a feature before I start developing it? I don't know. I don't have any set time. Hard to say. Every feature is a little different. I'm not the type to really spend just like days drawing stuff out, at least not recently. I remember I built some pretty large .NET apps back in the day though, and like we would whiteboard on those for a while, I feel like. I actually probably built larger .NET apps than I've ever built PHP apps, even Forge, in terms of just like lines of code. I mean, I've worked on single COBOL programs that were more lines of code than all of Forge in a single file. So with those kind of things, you had to whiteboard a little more. What's your view of package use? Roll my own or have a package project with 30 composer packages? I don't use a ton of external packages. Like, let me look at the project I'm working on now. So in the project I'm working on now, I use Cake PHP / Chronos for that's probably not even necessary anymore with Carbon 2. I use Passport. I use Predis, Pusher, Advanced Eloquent by Jonathan Rennick, and then the Spotty Once library, which I wrote the code for that once function, and then Spotty kind of packaged it up as a package. That's a pretty slick little package for sure. I don't use a ton though. How come I moved from .NET to PHP? PHP was just easier to build like a side project web app in than .NET at the time. It's easier to host. It's actually just a little faster to develop in too. All right, final call for questions. So the usage for the once package, actually almost one of the only places I've ever used it is in form requests, where a lot of times I'll have like, say you have, what's a good example? Let me just look in this project. A lot of times it's like, say I'm making a post request to update like a cloud provider on Forge, and on the form request I put a cloud provider method to give me the cloud provider from Eloquent or something. And I also want to use that in the form request internally, and then I'm going to use it in my controller, and I don't want to run the Eloquent query twice. So I'll wrap it in a once and pass it as like, I'll do once function and then recall the Eloquent query in the form request. That's where I like use it the most. I wonder how many times I used it in this project. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Gosh, like 30 times, 28 times. What do I tackle first in new Laravel projects? A lot of times the hardest thing first, because I like to fail early. Like if it's not going to work, I'd rather know that really quickly. So like I'll try to tackle the hardest things, or like the parts that I'm most unsure about first, because if the rest of the stuff is easy, then it's easy. But I like to try to do the hardest stuff first. That way I know. All right, I guess I'll wrap up here for today. Thanks for hanging out on this live stream Laravel snippet thing. So yeah, next week I'll probably do the podcast, and maybe in a few weeks I'll do another live hangout. See y'all later.